I'm Christine Kearns, Marketing Coordinator here for Sloan Museum. We are in the Pearson Gallery at the main building of Sloan Museum, standing next to the 1910 Buick Bug, which is kind of our signature vehicle here. We have one of only two that are known made today. So. Here in Sloan Museum's Pearson Gallery, we have Design for Speed exhibit going right now, which is fast and race-related cars. To my left here right now, we have a 1988 Buick Indycar. And in this gallery, we have 13 different vehicles. Most of them have been donated temporarily to the museum. As you can see on my left is an official pace car from the Indianapolis 500 in '83. We also have a local donation here of a 1974 Chevy Camaro. Behind me to my right here is a GNX, which is a special edition Grand National. This is one of only 547 built. We also have a local donation here of a Chevy Sports Coupe 1963 Corvette. Here at Sloan Museum, we also have a 1953 Corvette, which is the first year of production for the Corvette. 300 of them were produced locally here in Flint before they were moved to a plant in St. Louis, Missouri in 1954. Flint Wagon Works became the first carriage company in the Flint area in 1884. Here to my left is a 1908 carriage produced by that company.
Hi, my name is Jeff Taylor. I'm Curator of Collections here at the Sloan Museum. We're standing in the museum's Buick Gallery and Research Center. Come on, I'll take you for a walk around. This is a 1910 Model 10 Buick. The Model 10 Buick was one of the most significant cars in Buick's early history. The Model 10 was introduced in 1908. Its sales proved so successful that it gave Billy Durant, who was president of Buick Motor Company, gave him the financial support to actually begin General Motors. Buick produced the car from 1908 to 1910. This is a 1910 Buick Truck. A lot of people don't think of Buick as a truck manufacturer. Buick actually did produce a number of trucks, roughly between about 1908 and the early 1920s. This particular car is a 1933 Buick. It has sort of an interesting story behind it in that the car was purchased used in 1934 by a Buick engineer named J.P. Heiss. Mr. Heiss kept the car in his collection, or kept the car up until just a few years ago when he donated it to the Sloan Museum. In fact, he drove the car regularly to and from his job at Buick until the 1940s. This is a 1942 Buick Roadmaster. All 1942 Buicks, in fact all 1942 automobiles, are somewhat rare, primarily because of the war beginning in the end of 1941. Most automobile production in the U.S. ceased in January or in February of 1942. This 1948 Buick was actually used in 1997 on the Peking to Paris race. It's been modified for that race, as you can probably tell. And this is a 1950 Buick Super Convertible. One interesting thing about the 1950 Buicks is that distinguishes them from all of the other Buick models is what they can call the bucktooth grille, which is essentially the distinctive teeth on the Buick, on the grille, actually going over top of the front bumper. Early in its history, Buick Motor Division contracted with the McLaughlin Carriage Company outside of Toronto, Canada, to actually build bodies for its automobiles. Buick sent the chassis, engine, and drivetrain to Canada, and the McLaughlin Company actually produced the bodies for the automobiles. This is a 1920 McLaughlin Buick. The cars are sometimes known as McLaughlin, sometimes as McLaughlin Buicks. The name changed several times over the years. But that initial McLaughlin factory was really the beginnings of GM Canada, and today is the sort of the basis for the Oshawa car assembly plant outside of Toronto. That's actually this piece was actually taken from Auto World, which was an attempt to create sort of an automobile-inspired theme park in Flint. It didn't last very long, but we were able to acquire this piece from Auto World. This is a 1918 Model E37 Buick. Actually kind of unique in that it has a center door. A style that other manufacturers experimented with. I know Chevrolet built one. It's sort of awkward. All passengers entered in through the side. The front passengers had to step to the front to get into their chairs. Not a very successful model, but it is a good example of some of the early sedans that were being built. This is a 1930 Marquette Buick. Oakland had Pontiac, Cadillac had LaSalle, Buick had the Marquette. Essentially, these were established companies building a cheaper, less expensive version of their car. All Marquettes, though some were built in 1929, all Marquettes are considered 1930 model year. The company only lasted about a year. Of course, it was sort of poor timing with the stock market crash of 1929. So there aren't many Marquettes around, but we're pleased to have in our collection actually two of them. And this is our convertible version. It's a 1953 Super Riviera Coupe. Actually one of my favorite cars in the collection. Most people think when they think of the 1953, they think of the Skylark convertible, which really was sort of set the tone for future Buick automobiles throughout the 1950s. But the 53 Super is a beautiful car as well. This 1957 Buick Super Riviera Hardtop Coupe was actually owned by Harlow Curtis, who at one time was president of Buick and also president of General Motors. Was the first president of GM to lead their profits over the $1 billion mark. Curtis lived here in Flint, and he actually owned and drove this automobile. Most people, of course, think of Buicks as being big. In the early 1960s, Buick began experimenting with its special line, also using the name Skylark in association with the specials. This is a 1961 special. Actually shows that Buick was trying to tap in a little bit into the smaller car market. Obviously, there's a big difference between a car like this and some of the earlier cars that I've shown you, the 57s and the 50s. This is the Buick Silver Arrow, which is not really a concept car in the sense that it predates the production of the Rivieras. It actually is a stock Riviera, 63 Riviera, that has been modified. Bill Mitchell, who was GM's chief of design at that time and oversaw the Riviera production, took a production Riviera and modified it to sort of fit his own personal taste. He's lowered the roof a little bit. He's made a number of interior styling changes. He's done some work up here in the front of the car as well, and it really produced a beautiful car. This is actually one of the sort of the best liked cars by the public when they come to our museum. Buick really considered one of the pioneers of the concept vehicle with the Y-Job in 1938 and with this car, which is a 1951 XP300. The XP300 and the LeSabre experimental car were really built together as sort of sister automobiles. Whereas the LeSabre was primarily overseen by Harley Earl, GM's chief of design, this car was actually overseen by Charles Chain, who was GM's chief engineer. So this car focused on a lot of the engineering features. It had hydraulic jacks built in the car, so if you got a flat tire, you just flipped a button, the car actually raised itself up. But even though it was built by an engineer, it still has some great features. It has the teardrop lights, which actually came out again in the 1953 Skylark. It has some of the toothy grille that you'll see in the later 50 cars, and it's a great car. We get a lot of questions on the Phantom. A lot of people want to know what it is. It is a Buick. It's actually not really any particular make. It was designed by Bill Mitchell, who was chief of design at General Motors throughout the 1960s. This was sort of the last project he did. Now, it never really got beyond the phase you see now. There's no interior, there's no engine, there's no drivetrain. It's really just a shell. It's actually built on a Pontiac chassis, but it does have some of the design cues of Buick. You see the rims that are on it actually match the silver arrow. And this car really represents what Mitchell really liked in automobiles. He liked long and low. If you see some of the other things that Mitchell has done, and even his predecessor, Harley Earl, both of them really tried to get the cars as low to the ground as they possibly could, and they both liked cars really long. And so this is a good representation of sort of Mitchell's vision of the cars that he liked. A lot of people ask us why we have a Chevrolet in the Buick Gallery. Well, the Sloan Museum doesn't collect just Buicks. We collect Flint-made automobiles. And Chevrolet is part of our Flint's history as well as Buick. Chevrolet was actually founded in Detroit, but really didn't become very successful until they moved their operations to Flint. Now, this is a Classic 6 Chevrolet. This is actually the second oldest known Chevrolet in existence. This car really represents Louis Chevrolet's vision of the cars he wanted. It's a big, classy, fairly expensive automobile. Now, Chevrolet quarreled with Billy Durant, his co-founder of Chevrolet. Durant wanted low-priced automobiles that would essentially compete with the Ford Model T. That's why you see things like the Chevy Royal Mail, the Chevrolet 490, also being some of the more common of the early Chevrolets. Chevrolet, who lived in Flint for a number of years while he was racing with the Buick racing team, left Chevrolet not long after it was founded, and actually went on to build a number of other cars and continue his racing careers, but actually sort of faded from the automotive scene fairly early. This is a Patterson automobile built here in Flint. William Patterson was actually a carriage maker by trade, establishing a carriage shop in Flint in the early 1870s. Was a very successful carriage maker, had a good reputation of producing quality horse-drawn vehicles. And it was really late in his life, when he was in his 70s, that he actually began to convert his company from carriage to automobile production. Patterson automobiles were made up until Patterson's death in 1921. This is also one of my favorite cars in the museum's collection. It's a big car. It has the jump seats in the back for extra passengers, and really a very well-built automobile, and a very attractive automobile, I feel, even for an early open touring car. This is a 1922 Dort automobile. Dorts, like Patterson's, were built here in Flint, and like Patterson, Dort himself was a carriage maker. He and Billy Durant, the founder of General Motors, operated the Durant-Dort Carriage Company, one of the largest carriage manufacturers in the United States. Dort himself, even after Durant had left the company, Dort continued on with the manufacture of carriages. In fact, he continued manufacturing carriages up until about 1916. He was, of the three major carriage manufacturers in Flint that eventually produced automobiles, Dort was really the last of the holdouts. He went reluctantly into the automobile company. But once he started, he began producing a real high-quality, very attractive automobile. I think I've said a couple times that a few of the cars are on my list of favorites, but I would have to say that this is probably my favorite automobile in the museum's collection. It's a very attractive car. It's a very well-built car. Dort automobiles had a very good reputation for quality. Unfortunately, were unable to withstand some of the financial panics of the 1920s. And by about 1925, Dort actually ceased producing automobiles. So, but what I think is the best car in the museum's collection. James Whiting was president of the Flint Wagon Works, along with Patterson Carriage Company and the Durant Dort Carriage Company, made up what we call the big three of the carriage industry here in Flint. Now, unlike Dort, who got into the automobile somewhat reluctantly, James Whiting really saw the automobile as the future of the transportation industry, and by 1902 was actively seeking an automobile company for his company to purchase. They found one in Detroit, a struggling company called the Buick Motor Company. Whiting purchased the Buick, brought their facilities here to Flint, and began producing stationary engines and began to develop some automobiles as well. When financial troubles got sort of the best of the fledgling Buick company, Whiting actually sought out Billy Durant, one of his friends, but also a competitor in the carriage industry, and asked Durant to help him sell the Buick automobile. After Durant took the company over, Buick, of course, became an immediate success. But Whiting's company, the Flint Wagon Works, continued on building some automobiles. They built this car, the Whiting, for a number of years, up until about the time of Whiting's death, about 1912. There was an attempt to continue the company under the name of Dalton, but didn't really. But it didn't last very long. I'll sum it up that way. Actually, most of the Flint Wagon Works facilities actually became part of the Chevrolet Motor Company, which Durant was also heavily involved in. And today, those facilities, the area of those facilities, continue to produce automobile components here in Flint. One of the things that's really popular, especially with kids here at the Sloan Museum, is our 1917 Buick touring car, which, as the sign says, you can actually climb in and pretend that you're taking a ride. So if you come to the Sloan Museum, we invite you to hop in. The 1912 Little is one of the several automobile companies that actually became part of the Chevrolet Automobile Company. Similar to the Monroe, both the Little and the Monroe are automobiles that became part of Chevrolet, and both cars are very similar to the Chevrolet Royal Mail, which was an early success for Chevrolet. The museum also has in its collection a number of really great trucks. The Randolph truck with its solid rubber tires is a beautiful piece, very tough on your toes though if you ever get run over. The Flint truck, and of course the Sampson truck. Some great early examples of trucks. And one of our newest pieces, and really one of the best trucks in the collection, is our Chevrolet cab-over engine truck. So I hope that if you're ever in the mid-Michigan area, you take the opportunity to stop by the Sloan Museum and see some of the changes that we have going on here.